SPD conducted research with support from European Union-funded Managing Conflicts in Northeast Nigeria. So today will be an insightful one. We'll be walking you through the findings from the project, from the research, and we welcome you to this event. We hope that at the end of the day, we'll be getting revelations from communities in the Northeast, what they have been able to do to survive the insurgency and the challenges that they face. In the file bag that we gave you guys, an agenda that we intend to follow through. After now, Dr. Disumokolo will come with the welcome address. Dr. Disumokolo is the partner and chief executive of next year's SPD. He will start with the welcome address or the opening remarks to tell you what next year is about and what the project entails. I will implore everyone to adhere strictly to COVID-19 protocols, wear a mask always, and keep the physical distance so that we all be safe as we there. On that note, I likely want to invite Dr. Bisimo for his opening remarks. Dr. Mokolo, please.
A public policy consulting firm based here in Abuja. Next year SPD was high part of Nesta Advisory. Since 2008, we've been doing research and policy work in most difficult and challenging places in Nigeria, such as the Northeast, Niger Delta. Our research has cut across most of the security and conflict challenges in the country. For this particular project, it was commissioned by Managing Conflict in Nigeria, a project or a program funded by the European Union and British Council. We started the project in 2019, finished it, we would have done the dissemination in 2020, but because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we were unable to do that. So this year we decided to have it done and then close the project. But closing the project doesn't mean that the discussion will stop, because we will continue to engage the communities and engage government with some of our findings. This research was not done alone by Nestia, but we brought in professionals and consultants who helped as part of the team that were in these communities, interviewing the members of the community, interviewing people from government and international development and NGOs. We have Professor Harala Darba from University of Maiduguri. Prof. We have Professor Patricia Doni from University of Maiduguri. We have Dr. Chris Kwaja from Madigo University in Yola Adamawa. And then, of course, I was the team lead for the project, and another person that was equally part of the project. Other people were Ms. Ntigayan from Next Year SPD, and then we have another Professor Ibrahim Umara who participated. But today we'll be listening to the findings. We'll try to state, like Kenneth said, we'll try to state the objective of the project. Why did we, what was of interest to us? Why did we undertake this research? From there, most of the findings will be reviewed. It's our expectation that we want people to listen to the findings that will come out and engage us in some of the things and let the debate continue. It is important for us to say that this is the last round of this dissemination. We started by going to Yola in Adamawa, Maiduguri, and then we have the virtual dissemination on Wednesday. And this is the physical one that we are having today in Abuja as it will end it. However, from the weeks coming, SPD will continue to disseminate these findings in other ways, which might include, you might be seeing some of these people that have listed here appearing on the TV talking about this report. Because the idea is that we don't, SPD believes that town must meet ground. We don't believe that reports should be kept in the shell. We believe that reports should be read by government. So we'll continue to talk about this until it gets to somebody who is, who is in a position to say, okay, we think it's good for us to implement what the outcome of this research. I think I will stop here by again thanking you for coming.
If you are not following any of our social media handles, please do follow us at next year's SPG. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter. We have a whole lot of publications coming out every day that you may be interested in. Thank you. We introduce other presenters for today. They double as panelists and they are also part of the project team. We have Professor Patricia Tony. She's a lecturer at the University of Missouri. Borno State is the theater of the insurgency in northeast Nigeria.
Of course, we try to do our field work, data gathering and reviews. It is interesting for you to understand that Northeast has been in this conflict about 9 years before we went to the field. Initially, the research was to be conducted in what is popularly referred as the bi-states. The bi-states, Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe. But because of the insurgency in Yobe at that time, and other issues, we were able to go to Yobe. However, we were in Borno, which is like Kenneth said, is the theater of the conflict, as well as in Adamawa. 8 communities were visited in each of these states. 8 in Adamawa, 8 in Borno. 8 in Adamawa, 8 in Borno. What we tried to do was that before we set out, we had, as a team, asked ourselves, what are we trying to achieve with this research? The most important thing for us was to be able to underscore as well as understudy those factors that have made these communities to continue to be strong despite the conflict that was going on. So based on that, we felt there were factors which ordinarily we felt we knew, but there was need for us to be sure that our assumptions were correct. So that was why we went to the field. So those factors are the factors we regarded as those resilient factors. These are the issues that made these communities to be very strong. These are the issues that made these communities, even despite being displaced, they came back. These are the factors that made these communities, while this conflict was going on, they continue to live as one. Between 2019 and now, you can see that some of these communities have either come back to start rebuilding, especially in places like Adamawa, where they've gone into the rebuilding mode. But in places like Borno, they've continued to withstand the conflict and to go on. Charles, can you move the slide? For us to understand this, what we did was, the major objective for us was to first look at institutions in these communities that have made this possible for them. These institutions included the traditional institutions, maybe cultural institutions that were in these communities that has helped them. So we felt there was need for us to understand that. Secondly, we thought that there were coping mechanisms which, either within these communities, have been able to help them to build up this resilience. For these coping mechanisms, we are not foreign. They were indigenous with the communities and we needed to understand them. Some were economic, some were religious, some were cultural. So we set out to study this. In the course of this study, we felt that some set of people have emerged either stronger, some set of people have emerged, as these conflicts were going on, to become leaders in this community. I think that's where people like Professor Dolly will explain very well which comes in here. Women and youth. If you want, from the society where we come from, we always think that, men should take all the decision. But this conflict has shown that women became leaders in most of these communities. They became breadwinners in their family, because some of them lost their husband in the war. They stepped in. So we decided to understudy some of these things and to know why it happened the way it was happening. So it was important for us again to understand that why these things were going on. Some set of other institutions were working in these communities. Government was doing its bit to read that the security was trying to provide. It is very important for us to understand that organizations like the international development partners were working in these communities. The role they played, one way or the other, either aided the resilience of these communities. So it was important for us to understand the roles played by these international organizations, faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, other NGOs in these communities. So studying them was very important for us to understand how these things work. Now, for us to do this, we decided to aggregate our findings, our pre-findings into 6 indicators. For us, these 6 indicators were basic for us to know the methodology we are going to use. Because of the research we wanted to do, we felt it was not something we can sit in the comfort of our homes and write. We felt it was not something we can just send questionnaires, because some of these people may not even understand questionnaires. We felt that if we step into these communities, interview them, speak with them, understand their plight, understand their situation, we will feel it more, because we needed to understand it from their lens. When you speak to somebody, you can feel how the person feels. And that was why all of us here, the team, we went into the field. So for us to do that, the methodology we used, we are mostly qualitative methodology. We interviewed key people who were from those communities, who felt we are knowledgeable enough to tell us what we were looking for. Then we had focus group discussions. For the key informant, we interviewed about 64 people, and even more, but 64 were key people. There are other people we interviewed that we are not recording. Then we had about 32 focus group discussions, 2 in each of the communities. And each of the focus group discussions had between 8 and 10 people. Because we wanted to do this research to be very inclusive, women were represented, youths were represented, people with disability were represented. So that was the methodology we used. Now, because the research wanted to know how resilient these communities were, what were the factors that made them strong and were able to withstand the conflict even despite the ravaging situation it was called. We decided there were 6 things that were very important, key to us, and those 6 key factors are the things we are going to use to gather our data and do our analysis. The first of which was, we were trying to find what were their coping mechanisms. How did they cope? What were they doing to be able to cope? We find out that there were economic and cultural factors that were indigenous to these communities. They were local to them. It was not foreign. It was within them. That these economic and cultural factors were some of the things that helped them to cope with the conflict. Maybe the way they organize their farming, their trading, maybe the culture they had about you don't have to kill your brother, you don't have to sell your brother out. Maybe cultural practices that help them. If you're eating and your brother is not eating, you need to share. We found out that economic and cultural factors were very important and it helped them to survive. Again, we found out that faith played a big role. faith in terms of religion, promoted resilience in this community. People that, for them, even while the war were going on, they believed, see, if we keep trusting God, it will end one day. They believe that, see, our culture permits that we do not sell our brother, so we have to do this and that. Another factor that was key to us was the role by women and youth in building community resilience. Women and youth emerged stronger. Women and youth became part of the decision makers in their communities. Male elders couldn't now just take decisions concerning people in the community without asking women leaders, youth leaders about the opinion. It's almost similar to what happened in the Niger Delta. So it was important for us to understand that. Another factor that was very, very key to us that we thought that was important was issues of displacement and resettlement. Now, what was happening is that there were communities that were being displaced by Boko Haram. They would displace them. They would still come back to that community after a while. So we started asking, what is making this community so strong that even after every displacement they will come back? We needed to understand that, to know the factors that kept it, fortifying that. The issues of the resettlement was equally important. Places where communities moved from their community into another community and they settled well. And these were maybe two communities that probably Kanuri and Fulani, or Kanuris and Hausa, who ordinarily couldn't have stayed together as one in one place. But because of the conflict, they came, they stayed together, they used, even in the camps, they shared their communities together. It was important for us to understand what was the key to that. Another factor was practices that helped to counter extreme narratives. Some of these communities within a while started developing practices where their youth, their men, their women, who ordinarily would have done Boko Haram, they find a way to stop them, either by the kind of announcement they make in the church, in the mosques, or in the marketplace, and it really helped them. So we felt we wanted to find out these communities, and then we wanted to know how these communities did what they did, so that by the time we come out with the research, other communities can go live from there. Finally was community early warning strategies and mechanisms. It was important because our research, even before we went to the field, showed that there were communities, even before Boko Haram would come, they would move out of that community. So we wanted to know how were they doing it? What factors led them to be able to understand it? How were they able to coordinate themselves to move out and then come back? So that can be that displacement we talked about. You can see that these things are interconnected somehow. Because of they have a good early making mechanism, they can move out. Boko Haram can come, ransack their village and go. They will come back to that community. It was a resilient factor, we needed to know that. Then finally, as for us to do this, like I said before, I'm going to run through this because I've talked about it. Stakeholder mapping, we were able to talk to the people we needed to talk to. People from the security agencies in government, people from NGOs, community leaders, both women and men, youth leaders, people with disability, and in all of them, we made sure that the right people were spoken to. Now, finally, people will ask us, in this your research, how did you select who you spoke to? Because every research must take care of biases. Now, for us to do this, we felt we're not going to use a randomized sample. It's not even possible in where we're going. So we said we're going to do a non-proportional sample. We're going to target people who have the knowledge we want. So we'll go straight for them. So in this research, we made sure that whatever ethical issues that we needed to carry out or we needed to provide in our work, we are all carried out. So like we said, it was done using non-proportional sampling and all the mechanisms, all the ethical issues. We made sure there were no a situation where our research affected anyone. So you can see in the research, we are not going to mention names because we don't want a situation where people are attacked because of the information they give to us or not. And like I said, it was something that is dear to us, and other members of the team will continue to provide other information around the research. Thank you.
For someone to go to the theater of war and do this research, you can give me a better round of applause. Okay, Dr. Mokolo has walked us through the push factors that inspired this project and the initiatives or the methodology put in place to guide the research program. So moving on, we would like to welcome Professor Patricia Donnelly as she walks us through the challenges that some members of communities in the Northeast experience as a result of the insurgency. Professor Donnelly, please. A round of applause for Professor Donnelly.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Yeah, this segment will be looking at the challenges posed by the insurgency in the various communities that we worked, the research was on, or the targets of the research. All right, we'll be looking at, for the people who do not know where those states affected by Boko Haram, I will be presenting a map. We'll be having an overview of the northeastern part of Nigeria. We'll also be having an overview, or a brief overview about the insurgency in Northeast. And then, of course, the findings of the challenges that are posed by the insurgency. And then, of course, some implications of the challenges that we found. So, Northeast Nigeria is one of the 6 geopolitical zones, and it's an essential part of northern Nigeria. On 27th of May, 1967, the northeastern state was carved out of northern Nigeria as an administrative division in Nigeria. And I want to mention here that that was my first experience of going to the Northeast. I have been in the Northeast. My secondary school was in the Northeast. My school in Gigi Bauchi. So it was just created, the Biafra War had just begun, and then we were moved from our homes to there. But one thing that I experienced in the Northeast when I arrived there was actually the peaceful environment of the Northeast and the caring attitude of the Northeast. So I was not surprised when Borno State was AKA home of peace. That was before the insurgency, but it's no longer the home of peace, but the home of pieces. So it was a very, very nice. I just wanted to give a small background history of that place, the peaceful nature of the place. Later on, it was 6 states were casted or were carved out of the Northeast states, and these are what I refer to. Adamawa, Bauchi, Borno, Gombe, Taraba, and Yobe. All these states have actually experienced the Boko Haram insurgency, but at varying level or degrees. The most affected states are actually what are called the Bay states. The Bay states are Adamawa, Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe. If you look at that map, you will see the one on the left is Northeast and other regions of in the country. And the other one are the states in the Northeast. And we are bringing this one in to tell you the connectivity of those states, and then not only with themselves, but also with countries that are also outside of the state. So if you look at Borno State, for example, it has borders with Chad, it has borders with Cameroon, it has borders with Niger. And this is one of the challenges that will be mentioned, especially by search for common ground, was the issue of the influx of small arms and light weapons. Remember the fall of Libya, the problem in Libya, a lot of the arms were moved into those regions. And it was very easy to walk across to Chad, and you see them selling arms like they sell tomatoes in the market at very, very cheap price. So there was an influx, and you find that people had access to these small arms and light weapons. Sometimes I wonder why they are called small arms and light weapons. Anything that kills, for me, is a big arm. But then that's the term that is used for it. And then we have the linkages with each other. We have Onu has borders with Yobe, has borders with Gombe, has borders with Adamawa, you know, and then Gombe, Yobe has borders with Gombe, you know, so they are all interlinked. So you can see that there's always a movement of the armed people from one state to the other, you know, and the implications of that will also be mentioned later on. He said that the Northeast comprised about 13.5% of the entire population of Nigeria, which in 2017 was said to be 193,500,543 people. Well, telling you about the insurgency in the Northeast is like telling my grandmother how to beat an egg or something like that. The knowledge is there in the open place. But suffice it to say that by the time this research was going on, it was like about 10 years of insurgency in Borno State, in northeastern state. Borno State, of course, is the epicenter of the Boko Haram conflict. One thing that we got to know when we are studying in conflicts is that they say that violent extremism and terrorism thrive where there are all those places. And one of the things that exacerbated the insurgency in the Northeast, especially in Borno State, was the issues of the neglect of development of the people, especially investments in things like education, health, socio-economic issues, and so on and so forth. Officially, it's been put that 35,000 people, 35,000 people have been displaced. Sorry, 35,000 people have been killed. This is the official one. We can never really know how many people have been killed. It's when people start returning to their various places that people will begin to know how many people have been killed. There was a time the governor of Borno State, not this present one, was saying that people were just falling down like flies, that over 100,000 people have already been killed. So we do not know how many people have been killed, but officially 35,000 people have been killed as a result of the conflict. And over 2 million people have been displaced within and outside the country. Over 200 people were displaced. I talked about the countries that border those states, displaced into those places as refugees. And over 2 million people were displaced within the country as internally displaced persons. And they are not just within the northeastern states. There are IDP camps hosting IDPs as a result of the insurgency as far as the Edo State in Nigeria. At that time, when this report was going on about the humanitarian crisis had already reached its peak, and over 10.6 million people were in need of urgent assistance. I talked earlier on about the issues of the neglect in development of the people. Another thing that exacerbated the Boko Haram crisis was actually the issue of the climate change. Climate change that led to the loss of livelihood of people. For example, we are all aware of the fact that the Lake Chad has shrunk to maybe 1/10 of its former space that it occupied. You know that it was on the news at one time that the government was trying to recharge the Lake Chad. A lot of people depend on the Lake Chad for their fishing activities. Lake Chad was also a place where animals would graze. But it has now been sealed up as a result of the desertification and the movement of the sand dunes and all this stuff. Then there are also issues of counter-insurgency. So the challenges posed are as a result of both insurgency and counter-insurgency by the Nigerian forces, like the military, the multinational joint task force, and also by local vigilante groups such as civilian joint task force and the hunters, which were also brought in to fight the insurgency. Well, at one stage, I know that in Maiduguri, almost the local government areas, all the local government areas were actually under Boko Haram. But now they are no longer in control of any of the communities. But some of the communities still remain inaccessible. And some of them are still vulnerable to fresh attack by the Boko Haram. Recently, not too long ago, like about 2 weeks ago or so, we heard that Boko Haram overran Mate and took over the town. But later on, we were told that it was a tactical movement, you know, and they needed to get them in one place. Whatever the truth of the situation, we do not know. But what is important is that a lot of those places are still vulnerable to fresh attack by Boko Haram. So what are the challenges that the people enumerated or listed or identified? There were many challenges, but there are also coping mechanisms that were adopted or adapted by the people in the face of those challenges. I will not be talking about that because my colleague Professor Harnad will be talking about the coping mechanisms that were used by the people in the face of the challenges. Of course, the issue, one of the challenges is the displacement issues of displacement. You know, you can imagine what happened to them. One day, they were comfortable, they were living in their homes, and then suddenly, they were moved to another area without any of the things that they had in their homes. So they were stripped of everything they had, money, livelihood, and so on and so forth. They were made to be in shelters. So of course the challenge of even trying to cope, the challenge of even trying to get used to it, the challenge of the forced environment was there. And children could not understand what had happened, and children could not understand why parents could no longer afford to cater for them. And then the high rate of sexual gender-based violence or adultery. With the Boko Haram, we are aware of the fact that many women were abducted. They were not abducted to go and just cook. They were used for sex slavery. They were used for forced pregnancies. They were used as cooks. There was nothing they did not use them for. Some of the children that were abducted were married. If you remember the Chibok girls, some of them came back with children. But then in addition to what Boko Haram was doing, there were also other perpetrators of the sexual and gender-based violence. We had military or security forces. We had people who were working in the humanitarian sector, who were involved in sexual exploitation and abuse. And then when people talk about, when the people mention the adultery, when you are a female-headed household, which is one of the challenges of Boko Haram, and then you have children, 7, 8 children, and then there is no source of food. We are not thinking about the morality of religion. We are thinking about the survival of your people. So when they talk about adultery, most of these women are widows. These are women who did not know anything about even catering for a family, especially in the north. You find that they depend on the men to do everything, and then suddenly they are widows. So they have to get involved in survival sex. Then you have children who are heading households. Children as young as 16 are heading households. They are out of school. Because of the attack of Boko Haram on schools, a lot of schools were destroyed. Children are out of school. The children are on the streets. So if you go into all those communities, they are on the street. They call them unaccompanied children. And these children continue to become a recruiting ground for Boko Haram. And of course, they are also involved in all kinds of thefts. I've already talked about the loss of livelihoods that result in abject poverty and economic hardship. Teenage pregnancy. A lot of young girls get pregnant as a result of the sexual gender-based violence that operates especially within the camps. Like in Maiduguri, you can wake up in the morning and you find a child abandoned on the streets. The high rate of sexual transmitted diseases or infections, including HIV/AIDS, and communicable diseases such as cholera in their camps because of the overcrowded nature and the lack of potable water sometimes. And then there is high rate of drug abuse within the camps, which people use also as coping mechanisms. My colleague will talk about that more. Another challenge that was identified was the lack of access to farmlands, owing to the insecurity and discussion of farming patterns. Remember, a lot of people had to abandon their farmlands. So when they came to the cities where the IDP camps are, there is no land for them to farm. Even when they return to their places, like some people were asked, some communities that are returning, they are in garrison towns, which means that they cannot go beyond a certain perimeter of the community. So land for farming becomes very, very scarce, and there is high competition. There is also the fact that they are not allowed to plant crops that they normally would plant, especially crops that are able to hide the insurgents. Another challenge was the lack of access to market, both local and international. The northeastern states national market, but because of the Boko Haram closures of borders, they were no longer, the markets were no longer accessible. Curfews, there were curfews, which means that people cannot even operate locally within their communities. And when they tried to access markets, there was also extortion by the security people. One thing they mentioned again was that there is improper coordination among security outfits. So it is like one security outfit gets information, but the information is not shared with other people. And so they are found in the midst, like somebody I know will say, they were found between Skilla and Charities. They didn't know who to trust. And then lack of funds and logistics, and lack of formal training for the vigilante and local hunters. And then I just want to summarize what somebody in one of the focus group discussion with men at Gigantak in Borno State stated in August 2019. He said thousands of children became orphans. Their parents have been killed or went missing. Hundreds of women became widows. Their husbands were either killed, went missing, or conscripted by Boko Haram. Some women developed mental illness owing to trauma. Youth have been killed, and many are out of school as their schools were set ablaze. While as for those living with disability, no one is talking about them as they have been neglected even before the insurgency. But during the insurgency, some were burned to death as they could not escape from the violent attacks on their communities. That summarizes the various challenges that the communities were facing. And of course, the issue of stigmatization was a big problem. Women who were associated with Boko Haram, for example, who were rescued by the military, came back to their various communities and they were neglected. And I'll give you one example. One lady who was abducted on the way to bury one of their colleagues, a nurse, was rescued, and my friend came back to look for her in her community. And she kept on asking, let me say it in Hausa, do you know this nurse? She called the name. She called one, after some time, she called one small girl. Said, do you know that woman who was abducted by Boko Haram and had come back to you? He said, look at her house. Nobody knew her by her name, but by the fact that she was a woman who was abducted. And that is the stigma that surrounds any woman who has been associated with Boko Haram. So what are the implications of these challenges? And I'll just rush through them. Death and displacement is manifested, death caused by insurgents and counter-insurgency operations. People were caught in the crossfire. And I think in the military term they say collateral damage or something like that. What is the implication? Loss of major breadwinners, increase in women and child breadwinners, and increase in school dropouts as a result of the displacement. Loss of social and economic life. There is disruption in agriculture, which is the mainstay of the people. Lack of access to farmlands and marketplaces, like I said earlier, and collapse of investment in places affected. What is the implication? There is rising abject poverty in affected communities, increasing intrusion of people into cities, and rising criminal activities in others. Collapse of security, extortion by community security agents, poor coordination among security agencies, and then there is rising vigilante security. Intergroup disharmony, rising perception that certain groups within communities are aiding insurgency, and then increasing lack of community social cohesion. And of course, rising social problems and challenges. There is high rate of sexual abuse, increasing theft, teenage pregnancy, gender-based violence, high rate of communicable diseases, high rate of drug abuse in some of the communities. And the implication is rising social disorderliness. So I said this study identified many challenges that have arisen from the insurgency and counterinsurgency in the Northeast. It has also identified the resilience of the affected communities through various coping mechanisms, which is the subject of the next presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
On that note, join me to welcome Professor Harun Adalpa to this week. While it is troubling to hear what many residents in Northeast are going through as a result of the insurgency, hopefully what Professor Adalpa will be telling us will lighten our mood. Thank you. Professor Adalpa.
That's why it's not reflected. But my responsibility is to summarize the key findings that were made during the field work, and specifically focus on the coping strategies that the victims of the insurgency had to face. And the findings were categorized into two broad areas. One, specifically economic survival strategies, and the second category is on the socio-cultural adaptation strategy that was adopted. Let me probably amplify what Dr. Mukolo had told you earlier in respect of the methodology, because it could surface in the question time. How many communities did we cover and where are they located? In the case of Adamawa State, we didn't have much problem because the communities were spread across the various zones, covering 8 communities. In Borno State, the same luxury could not be enjoyed because at the time of the field work, there were restrictions on movement and a lot of warning signals, especially for non-governmental organizations and foreigners moving across the state. And even governmentally, some of the local governments were inaccessible. So as a way out, we decided to identify clusters of communities reflecting various areas, geographical areas of Borno State that are resident in Maiduguri Township and around the fringes of Maiduguri. So you will hear, if you get the detailed findings, that so from such community, such as Calabar says so, community from Baga says so, all these people are belonging to these indigenous communities, but they were then resident in Maiduguri. And they were clustered in 2 categories too. Some were in formal IDP camps, while others were in host communities scattered by the members of those communities. So this is the picture you should imagine when we give you the general highlight of the key findings. So with this background information, what are the specific coping strategies that were adopted? One would not speak of coping strategy unless you know that there was destabilization that was experienced. So from what Professor Dolly had told you, we had this community that were very vibrant in terms of commercial activities and trading activities, and also engaged in farming, and the farming took different shapes: arable farming, fishing, and animal husbandry. And there were also people engaged in transport businesses, commercial transport businesses between and among towns. And then there were also those who were engaged in normal trading activities that were linked to specific goods and services. Unfortunately, the totality of this community was disturbed. So the profession you learned, if you are a fisherman and you found yourself in a landlocked area like Maiduguri, you could not continue with your fishing. So what did you do to survive? So from our investigations, the following coping mechanisms, irrespective of economic aspects, were adopted by the communities. The first coping mechanism is for those who have been uprooted from their normal professional callings and as well as their locations. They had to devise a new strategy of survival because their means of livelihood was disturbed. Therefore, the ready coping mechanism that was adopted was learning new trades. And you could see how difficult it could be for somebody learning new trade in an environment characterized by insecurity. Who is there to teach you the new trade? How composed and stable would you learn such trade? In spite of all this, the displaced persons had quickly, just as survival strategy, adapted to new trades. Some of the common ones were tailoring by men, then very prominent one which has now been sustainable and attractive is knitting of traditional caps by young girls. This practice had been especially around Bamban area even before the researchers, but it became popularized, especially in the IDP camps. And these knitted caps are very costly. So a lot of them learned the trade and had ready markets, and therefore they were able to sustain themselves. The other common trades that were learned were artisanship and craftsmanship. Here we got some responses that some people learned how to be masons, some people learned to be bricklayers, some welders, some auto mechanic. But it should be noted here that this market that these people entered were constrained because of restriction on movements. You could learn to be an auto mechanic, for instance, but since there is curfew, there is restriction on movement. Who will bring these cars for repairs? Well, there were some people that were brought, but even these trades were seldomly high income yielding. The other ready coping mechanism, which was popular among young boys and girls, and even married women, is to engage in menial jobs. And these menial jobs comprise of house-to-house visitation to solicit engagement of these casual laborers as cleaners of premises, and then washmen or washwomen of utensils and clothing. A lot of them make money from there. Then the next category of coping mechanism along the economic line is petty trading. And the most popular one among the petty traders were those who engaged in food production, especially baking of akara or beans cake, and then some other fast foods that were being sold around the streets or wherever people gathered, and sometimes at construction sites where it was possible for construction to go on. Another one which was adopted, but it was very temporary, especially in the unstable communities that the people were displaced to, was the gathering and selling of fuel wood or firewood. Unfortunately, this source of survival was also very risky, because in some of the communities that firewood could be fetched, Boko Haram could also visit at any moment. Therefore, as a coping strategy, some of the fuel wood sellers located in Maiduguri, they either buy the firewood from a third party and sell with marginal profits, or they engage in selling charcoal, which was also brought from Jos and some other places to thrive in. And some, especially the religious people, some of the firewood fetchers, although it was not so prominent in our findings, but from the general knowledge about the area in Borno, some firewood sellers ended up being abducted by the Boko Haram people. Then there were people who were engaged in vegetable selling, groundnuts, and other fruit selling. It was not also amplified in this finding, but in some other communities in Borno State. This type of coping strategy, which was adopted by the victims, was capitalized upon by also the insurgents. It was not uncommon to go to a small village settlement and seeing Boko Haram pretending to be selling vegetables and petty items while hiding AK-47 under. In fact, in some markets, some of them displayed the nose of the gun to tell the people that if you mess up with us, here we are. Unfortunately, the people could not raise alarm because of fear for their lives. But I am bringing this because in our recommendations and policy guide, this may be very significant. The victims are using petty trading of vegetables and other things to survive, whereas the insurgents are using the same trade to act as spies as well as intimidate the people. Because they pose as legitimate traders, and when they are going, they buy the essential commodities and take it home. Then the economic aspect that was also popular, which was complementary, was for those whose trade were still, they were displaced from their main trading stations, but their source of merchandise was blocked. A specific case which we found out was the Baga community that was living in the Baga fish market inside Maiduguri. We interviewed them and they said that the government banned trading of fish in Baga because of insecurity. Some fishermen were caught with fish on the top but guns at the bottom. So because of that, the military banned trade of fish in Baga. So if you are selling fish inside Maiduguri and your main supply is blocked, what do? This group ingeniously discovered another route of supply, and that route was in Hadeja, in Jigawa State. But this also has implications because the route to Hadeja is longer. You have to pass through Double Troop and Potiskum and go around and come back. So they had to sell the fish at a very exorbitant price because for them to break even, the cost of supply has increased. But at least the market still continued with this coping strategy of exploiting extra market. But as Professor Dollis indicated, even this alternative was a problem because the security men who banned fish trade in Baga were still trading in fish in Maiduguri through an illegal route. And when I went, I accompanied the team to interview the fish sellers. In fact, one of the ladies told us that she came, she's an Igbo girl, and the focus group discussion didn't include her. And the people who were discussing with also were apprehensive of her presence. But she's an enlightened lady. She pulled me aside and said, Oga, these people don't like me to thrive, but I'm also a fish seller. I said, why do you sell your fish? He said, she sells it in Shagari housing estate. I said, why do you normally get it? She said, a soldier who lives in Brigadier Madari Barrack, which is across the road, brings the fish in the night, and she sells through the black market for these people. But she was not accepted as part of the guild. So the point I'm trying to make here is, officially the fish market was banned. But surreptitiously, the military people were still bringing fish. And there was an allegation that they actually took over the fish market. But then, you as an ordinary fish seller in the fish market cannot compete with them. So the trader has to go to the Hadejia option. The other coping strategy, which some of those who responded to our questionnaire and discussion told us, was that they were assisted by NGOs. The most prominent of the NGOs that assisted such groups was the Sheburi North Women Association. And this NGO worked with international NGOs and other trading partners, development partners, to get some resources for capacity building and security, skill acquisition training for the young ones. And specifically, the details will be in the report, but we discovered that about 1,200 young people, especially women, benefited from that scheme through micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. So that was a very prominent kind of coping strategy, empowerment. And then the last, the economic aspect, some people were lucky to have individual loans, borrowing. But it's not sustainable. You borrow for somebody who has potential of repaying. And if you lend to somebody who has no capacity to repay, you are just taking a risk. And most of those who resorted to borrowing, although some succeeded, the majority of them could not. So we now move to the coping strategy that is under the socio-cultural coping mechanisms. The most readily one that was used by the helpless victims was begging, street begging. And this was common among women who used their children to attract sympathy from passers-by to give them alms. Alternatively, people who are plying the road are sometimes involved, they don't give alms. So these affected women and children sometimes knock at houses when they gauge that it is time for eating, to beg for at least some food stock. And some also go to those they perceive as rich and beg for grains and raw materials. But this is not to say that the government, through NEMA and SEMA, did not assist these people. The government assistance was there, but it was not going around sufficiently. And Dr. Mokolo had highlighted this other strategy, that is, when people discover that they don't have enough to go around, and based on our cultural background, it will be almost a sin to allow somebody to stand when you eat. So in the communities we visited, they said group eating was adopted as a survival strategy. When you eat in your group, you would discover that it's a systems mechanism. If you divide the food and share it, will be so small. But if you are eating it in a group, miraculously everybody gets some satisfaction, although not fully. So people make use of the little they had by sharing what they also had. Some people also got involved in association. This was very popular, especially among women, and more so among religious organizations, through mutual aid groups. No matter how small, they contributed things and organized a mini cooperative societies and survived on that. This was augmented by NGOs, NEMA, and SEMA. And also, as a researcher, you should be interested. How do you think that this man will just voluntarily engage in cooperative society? Some of these cooperative societies were initiated from outsiders. The humanitarian assistance team needed some kind of semblance of organizational network to give assistance. So some people capitalized on that and got some means of survival or livelihood through that. The other socio-cultural strategy adopted had been also talked about, that is the self-help in terms of security and safety for the communities. This was handled mainly by the youth and hunters, and the civilian JTF was a typical demonstration of that survival strategy. They complemented the non-formal security agents and maintained surveillance and vigilance on their communities. This group was not only maintaining surveillance and vigilance, but they were also serving as source of information sharing with the military and other security agents. They also were engaged in direct combats with the insurgency, but led by the military. Then another notable contribution which came from traditional rulers was a coping strategy through a campaign, that is enlightenment campaign and sensitization campaign. Some elders engaged in enlightening their communities, giving them messages that may help to allow them to be sensitive to early warning signals within their community, and also strategies they should adopt in case there were signs that there would be threat on their community. So through that informal network, some of the attacks were even abated because of the early warning signal, which was spiritual adaptation to disaster. People resorted to religion as a coping strategy, and this was very vibrant in almost all the communities we went through, more so by the women. There were sessions of fasting and prayer for security, and this cut across Christian and Muslim communities. There were prayer sessions done by women. There were prayer sessions also handled by clergies. Another coping strategy, which was psychological, is the spirit of the social also, spirit of forgiveness. This was important, and it was found in most of the communities that they adopted the spirit of forgiveness as a balm that would heal their hard feelings and the harms or the trauma they suffered. So this forgiveness spirit was amplified by religious leaders or clerics. especially for the youth also, there was another coping strategy, especially when the time was almost ripe for saying, we are almost getting out of the insurgency, although it didn't last. But when people were bottled up in their houses for too long, the unexpended energy by the youth resulted in some kind of criminal activities and antisocial behavior. But when the community were opened and movement was allowed, it was observed that, especially in most of the communities, young people engaged in sporting activities. And also there were a series of cultural dances and festivals that were carried out. And something very curious, which may be contradictory, but it is natural. If you go to some of the IDP camps in Maiduguri, hardly will you pass 3 or 4 days without witnessing marriage ceremonies. These people are facing this very difficulty, but yet the rate of marriage was very, very high. Okay, it's a sociological question that we say, okay, maybe it's part of escape route. If you are frustrated, you can get some solace through having legitimate lovers, which brought what Professor Dolby said, that is adultery also because of circumstance. Some people remarry because they want at least some happiness. The one that seems hilarious is the adaptation strategy which was used by the Boko Haram, the CJTF and hunters. These people said, no matter how difficult and threatening the insecurity is, you can adapt to that threat by fortifying yourself. So they resorted to use of herbs and charms as a way of survival. And in fact, so many people believe that there's potency in this type of fortification. They are so important when they take these things and they face the Boko Haram, sometimes to the extent that the military people will have to beg them to come back because they are so brave and confident. The other survival strategy, which is partially economical but sociological also, is the resorting to the negative way of escape. One way of negative escape was experienced through resorting to bribe the security agents to have free passage of goods and services. If the people don't like you to trade in fish, and you know there are the people trading in fish, and you are caught with fish, you give them money to allow you to pass. So that is a negative coping strategy which should be maybe taken up in our recommendation or a follow-up. And this helps people to get free passage for the legitimate goods, but we found out in our interviews that apart from the legitimate trade, especially by commercial transport operators, as they bribe the security agent, they also carry contraband, such as petrol products. And the danger in that was that they became now a link between the Boko Haram and the petrol market. Some of them were caught with some of these products. So they were trying to make fast money by being the supply route to Boko Haram. Finally, the youth and maybe the disgruntled elders who had lost the control of their family as the breadwinners out of frustration adopted a coping strategy of hooking onto drug addiction, which gives them temporary solace, but it becomes a serious problem on the community. So having looked at these economic and sociocultural coping strategies, what are the key issues that we would like to focus on that should be followed up? I summarize as saying that, yes, from the research output, it is clear that individuals and communities on their own are tempted to help themselves by themselves. 2, it was also clear that there was a synergy built between the individuals and communities with governmental and non-governmental agencies. 3, there was flux or instability in whatever coping strategy was adopted because of the continual recurrence of violence and attack. A community that looked like a safe haven for these people will be attacked in few weeks and it becomes unstable. So it is a continual thing. That is why eventually almost all the communities now merged into Maiduguri Township. And this has high level implication on how to solve the problem. Then another thing that we need to also observe in the coping strategy, especially by the religious leaders, was yes, it was good that they preached the spirit of forgiveness. Yes, they said that at the end of every human being's attempt, only God can solve the situation. Therefore, prayer is the most potent escape route. They also were exposed to danger because in their various mosques, especially, I don't think it happens in the churches, but especially in the mosques, if you start preaching kind of forgiveness and try to give a counter narrative about the Boko Haram, and if you imply that Boko Haram is following wrong interpretation of the religion, you are exposing yourself to danger. Because they also have their spy network in the worship places. So yes, religion was adopted as a coping mechanism. Proselytization in terms of content narrative was adopted, but it creates also a window for insecurity for the religious leaders. We may have to look at this. And this has something to do with part of our recommendation in terms of de-radicalization, dissociation, and demilitarization for the purpose of rehabilitation, reconciliation, resettlement, etc. If you have this type of more key setup, all these strategies may be faced with difficulties. So I just in a highlight says that yes, the coping strategies were attempted, but the extent of success leaves much to be desired until such a time that the insecurity is highly controlled and the various communities are stable enough. Unfortunately, like the Borno State Governor has been following up, the best place to rehabilitate a displaced person is taking him or her back to the ancestral communities. So that one, we leave it to probably the follow-up. Thank you very much.
This report can be accessed on our website, www.nextyearspd.com. We've produced a policy brief to that effect for easy reading. So we implore everybody to visit our website at www.nextyearspd.com to access the policy brief. You can also follow up different articles focusing on different issues such as security, peace and development in Nigeria and Africa. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I will quickly thank Next Year SPD and NCN for the opportunity given to us to participate in this research and to also present the findings and recommendations of the research. Because at the end of the day, for us, the and so what question comes up. And the and so what question can only be addressed when we look at the way forward in terms of what needs to be done, who should do what, and how it should be done. And it's within that context that the recommendation for this research was crafted. And it's supposed to deal with 3 underlying pillars. One, from the research pillar, what are those areas we think are very relevant for us, all of us seated here, that we can carry forward. This research is not an end in itself. It provides opportunities for people to also identify areas of research needs that they can also work on. Secondly is the programmatic pillar. What is it in the research from the standpoint of intervention that we can identify and begin to implement? And the third pillar is the policy pillar. What is it about the recommendation that policymakers need to pay attention to and address, and in what way or ways are we equipped as actors seated here this morning to engage policy makers? Because it all boils down to how we're able to bridge the gulf between people and policy. And if we're able to do that effectively, then we will be addressing some of the fundamental issues around how to turn around the situation in the Northeast. Unfortunately, today we are not talking about the Northeast alone. The Northwest has become a hotbed for insecurity. We see what's happening in the Southwest. But what we have here as the recommendation should also help us think through some of the key and effective ways that we can provide more comprehensive responses to all the insecurity challenges that are defining what we call our country today, Nigeria. The recommendations have been informed by a critical analysis of the findings and pragmatic thinking on the way forward towards countering violent extremism and mobilizing locally owned resistance to the insurgents. And for us, this is very important, that at the end of the day, when you talk about peace, when you talk about insurgency, it boils down to the people. And when recommendations target the people, then we need to begin to look at how we can engage the people at the community level with the solutions. Because sometimes we sit in Abuja and craft the solutions, but the solutions do not neatly fit into the realities of these communities, and that's why this opening statement is very important. One key issue we also identified in the report, which we are recommending here, is the whole question of DDR, that's demobilization, disarmament, rehabilitation, and reintegration. This is a very sensitive issue, and because of the sensitivity associated with this activity, it is important for government to undertake massive public sensitization and awareness. Because where such is absent and people don't know what you intend to do, at the end of the day, you will not achieve value for intervention. We should avoid what M.K. Abiola talked about, shaving someone's head in his absence. If we want to shave the hair of members of the communities, then we must go to them with some of these approaches by engaging in massive sensitization. And this is important because as communities buy into this project, success is assured. And our focus here is that for us to ensure that community assurance, community support, and buy-in of such projects are guaranteed, then you need to really engage the people. And there are many ways you can do that. Radio programs are very important tools. Yes, they might not have access to internet in terms of WhatsApp, but sometimes we underestimate these communities. WhatsApp is becoming a very important tool, because when you ask people within the communities how they had access to certain information, they will tell you either through text message or through WhatsApp, and these are all areas within the social media space as well as the traditional media that government can use, leveraging on some of the key social network and social capital that exists in the communities. I'm talking about faith leaders, traditional leaders. These are very important actors that government can use, and that in using them to get that community buy-in, you will also be able to use them to deal with the issue of acceptance when it comes to the repentant members of Boko Haram. This is a very sensitive issue. Many of us watch Chinese film as we were growing up. In Chinese film, when you kill the teacher of a small boy at age 10 in Shaolin Temple, what happens? He leaves the community, travels somewhere, acquires new skills, and does what? He comes back. For what? Revenge. Until he kills the boss. And the boss always dies. Now, that's the situation we have in the Northeast. Because many of the victims of insurgency will tell you, give you vivid stories about the people that attack them. They know them and they are waiting for them until they avenge or until they seek revenge. What Mahmoud Mandani talked about in his book, When Victims Become Killers. So if we don't address that today, today's victims will become tomorrow's killers, and it becomes a cyclical issue to deal with. Also, we need more coordinated efforts on the part of government to effectively manage humanitarian intervention. Today, the Northeast has become a tourist site for international actors. Everybody is there with his suitcase and dollar or naira under the guise of intervention. A 3-bedroom flat in Maiduguri today is in millions, more expensive than in Abuja. Many people shut down their hotels and handed over those places to international organizations that are using them as guest houses or offices. And the whole question of synergy, cooperation, is missing. And the government of Borno State consistently drew attention to that gap when it comes to how to deal with the issue of a coordinated approach to intervention in Borno State. And that is something that from the angle of government, non-governmental organizations, development organizations or agencies, community-based organizations, these are all actors that need to be in the same room, sit in one round table to address that. I know in Borno State today they have a special advisor on NGO that is trying to coordinate that. But the 3 states need to be on the same page because they are all victims. They need to be on the same page when it comes to the kind of design that they are putting in place in order to address this challenge. Continuous consultation and collaboration among intervening actors in the region will also help in reducing duplicity, contradictions, and faulty perception of each other's roles and responsibilities. Because where you have competition at the expense of cooperation, it becomes a major challenge to deal with. And for us, our focus is how to ensure cooperation between and amongst the actors. Development partners should liaise with the government to ensure that more women associations are formed in the communities. This will help create safe spaces where women can freely deliberate on issues affecting them. For many of the women working on UN Security Council Resolution 1325 that talks about women, peace, and security, this is a very important area for advocacy. And we're not just talking about women. The He for She campaign by the UN Women today, Professor Donnelly is one of the key advocates for that, is a project that seeks to harvest more men on the campaign, to bring in more men towards ensuring that we contribute our quota to this discussion. How many of us watch 300 Spartans? 300 Spartans. I mean, you watched it. I'm happy. 300 Spartans. Now, in that film, an emissary was sent from Persia to visit the king of Sparta. There was a conversation that took place. And in that conversation, the queen of Sparta interjected. And when she interjected in the conversation, the Persian emissary got so furious. And he said, why on earth will a woman interject in a conversation between men? How many of us remember that conversation? And what was the response of the queen? You forgot. She said, because in Sparta, great men are born by women. And that is what the He for She campaign that borders on how we can also strengthen community level committees and encourage them to be committed to community governance and decision making at the community level is also important. This is one recommendation we are also making, because where local level governance is missing, it becomes difficult for you to even mobilize the people to come together to agree on how they can pursue collaboratively agendas that will help them. And when you look at the theory of divide and rule, it works so perfectly when it comes to the way we politicize communities, to the extent that the divisions within those communities makes it difficult for you to even bring them together to pursue common agendas. And we think that when you strengthen community level committees and help give them the kind of support that they require, it's also become difficult for even violent extremist groups to begin to identify or mobilize individuals within those levels. Government should also intensify its effort in supporting cultural activities that facilitate interaction and communication among communities, such as marriage ceremonies, festivals, and sports. Today, the in-team is Sports for Peace. Many of our representatives at the state and national level go to their constituents and talk about what? Sports for Peace. Now, from the angle of dealing with insurgency and supporting communities, this is an area that we think need to be pursued. Markets. In some communities, market days are also days that they bring in dancers from different villages to come and they celebrate. So we can also take advantage of such opportunity. The disaster response strategy of the Northeast Development Commission should be one that is integrative and inclusive in ways that target vulnerable populations such as women, people living with disabilities, girls and children, as well as host communities that have been stretched as a result of the support they provided to displaced persons that are affected by insurgency. And one point to note here is that outside the work that the Northeast Development Commission is doing, the federal government in 2001 designed a draft policy, what they call the National Disaster Response Plan. And since 2001, that document has been a draft. They did not finalize it. And if that document was finalized and it became a policy, I think it will address a lot of the issues we are talking about today. And this is also something that we can pursue vis-a-vis the kind of work that the Northeast Development Commission will do, because all it will have done is just to take advantage of the provisions or the relevant provisions of the National Disaster Response Plan and begin to implement. Security agencies must intensify efforts to defeat insurgent groups and restore enduring peace in the affected communities. The government should embark on a cleanup of arms that have found their way into the hands of idle youths, including members of the Civilian Joint Task Force and unemployed youth. And with the coming of the new service chiefs, This is very important, and I think it is important that we begin to set the agenda for the service chiefs. We shouldn't just complain or agonize, we should also organize. And by organizing, it is important that just on this, we can begin to ask ourselves very critical questions. What is it that we think the new service chiefs should do that was not done in the past? Or what was done but was not done well, and we think the new set of service chiefs can do better by engaging them in this kind of ways. We think we will be able to achieve results on this issue. Women should be given high-ranking positions in the community committees to encourage and get them committed to community governance and decision making. Last week I was having almost a similar conversation with myself and Professor Donnelly with the members of the Borno State House of Assembly, and I asked a very simple question. Do you have a woman in the Borno State Security Council? Because apart from the State Executive Council, you have the State Security Council that takes all decisions relating to security in the state. And when you ask yourself that question, even in the context of the federal government, we have a National Security Council chaired by the President. We have a woman in that council. Yet we have a National Action Plan of 1325. Now at the state level and the local level, these are the kind of conversations that we should be holding. That if we really need women, and if we are serious about empowering women, then they should not just be relevant in peacemaking, they should also be relevant in security-related decision-making processes, because that is very important. Religious and traditional institutions that have expanded the scope of their responsibilities to include conflict resolution, mediation, and peace building should be strengthened. Government-led peace building initiatives should incorporate the already existing local platforms for sustainability. And that we think that where such actors are empowered or we work with them, we will be able to strengthen their own capabilities. Sometimes we assume that they can do the job. It is because the skills are not there. But if they are provided with the kind of skills that are required for peacemaking, for peace building, for reconciliation, for dialogue or mediation, they will be in a better position and they will be better equipped to really deal with some of these complex issues. Like the one I mentioned earlier. How do you deal with returning members of Boko Haram? How do you deal with that situation of a young girl who gave birth to a child and the father of that child was a member of Boko Haram, and in the society he is called a bastard? What kind of reconciliation mechanism do you put in place to deal with those kind of children? Because he is growing up in an environment, in a community where he is seen as bad blood. And tomorrow he might want to aspire for something. You will see petitions coming up that we don't even know the father. The father ran away. He is this, he is that. Now these are all realities that we face in our societies. So how do we, what kind of reconciliation mechanism or what kind of skills do we think our local peace builders like religious leaders, traditional leaders can be given to ensure that they effectively deal with some of these issues? And the last one is about technology. The use of technology, which was found to be useful in building early warning mechanisms, has helped communities to avoid attacks by insurgents, which should be encouraged. Also, information dissemination through mainstream media, which has been useful in broadcasting security alerts and educating the public, should be continued. Government and media practitioners should strengthen this practice as a veritable channel for easy dissemination of information. Both the traditional and the new media, what we call the social media, are very important tools for us on this. And we can even engage the private sector. What stops MTN, for instance, from providing support to communities through short codes that they can use when it comes to passing information. UNDP has supported Plateau and Kaduna on that. They have capabilities for communities to really send messages in that way. Communities in the Northeast should also benefit from that kind of support, and this is something that the NCC can easily do. So they are key actors that we think should be engaged or will be engaged to ensure that we leverage on existing technology and capabilities that we have in the country to support communities. Because when they leave, then they will be able to address their livelihood. Because it's only when they know that they are alive that they can talk of going to farm, going for fishing, and other businesses that are already dead or dying in the Northeast. And in conclusion, we say the war against insurgency is not for government alone, it's for all of us. And that's why we are all seated here. You recall J.P. Clark's point, casualties.
Yeah.
How many of us? That casualties were not only those who died during the Civil War. The fact that you were told, you heard, you saw, you are also a casualty. And the fact that we are talking about the Northeast here and now means we are casualties to that insurgency, and that is why we must work together and as a people join hands with government and other actors to ensure that we achieve our desired goal of a peaceful Northeast region and a peaceful Nigeria. Working with communities and institutions actually presents an opportunity for government to win the hearts and minds of the people. It provides opportunities to create programs for external actors, as well as strengthen community cohesion, promote peace building, as well as aid counter-insurgency actions. And these counter-insurgency actions we talked about is broadly defined both in terms of the kinetic and the non-kinetic counter-insurgency responses. Because where you use one at the expense of the other, you will really not be dealing with the situation. And we've seen how we rely on the use of force excessively, that we forgot that there are other soft approaches that needed government intervention. Unfortunately, the soft approach came so late. It was in 2014. Boko Haram started in 2009. It was in 2014 that the federal government launched a soft approach to countering insurgency in the country. So how many years after 2009? So that is also part of the challenge that you can find where you don't really put in place a more comprehensive and robust framework for response rather than this silos approach to dealing with insurgency. Thank you.
Well, I'll take 2 minutes. It's a disclosure from the start.
Okay, go on, ma'am.
Let's be serious about this, and if you are going to say anything important, this is a serious issue. Cannot
go on, ma'am. Go on, please.
I'd like to start from where Dr. Quadra left off. And he talked about counter-insurgency activities. The UNESCO adage that it is in the minds of men that insecurity, insurgency, hatred starts. It's also in the minds of men, women, and children that it needs to be curbed. That's number one. I hope, Chris Prager, you're getting me. So, we need to intensify the level of counter-insurgency rhetoric by the clerics. For example, CDD is doing a lot of work, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. They have trained a number of ulamas in the Northeast and the Northwest. So such training should continue, that's one. Number two, Chris also mentioned the National Disaster Development Plan. I say that this should be taken pari passu the national policy on refugees, internally displaced persons, and vulnerable persons. Can I repeat that for you to get? You got me? That the National Disaster Development Plan cannot be in isolation. It should be taking pari passu the national policy on refugees, internally displaced persons, and vulnerable persons. It is an extant document in the National Commission for Refugees and IDPs. Number 3, the women situation. They are the most affected. It is their husbands that are killed, it is their sons that are killed, and they become leaders of households. So they should be part of any discussion on resolution. Number 4, the youth bulge needs to be taken seriously. Drug abuse and all that is something that should be harnessed. The positive energy of the youth should be harnessed positively and not allowed to go negative. I'm skipping some things. Let me just mention 2 more for time's sake. Coordination of humanitarian activities is very important. The Northeast should not be a place for every tourist to go. Government needs to take this seriously, henceforth. Technology is so important, and therefore there should be portals where people can talk to one another in coded form. For example, I would say that the effort at intelligence gathering is more important than the kinetic. You cannot do the kinetic and the non-kinetic successfully without successful information gathering. Lastly, the support of religious leaders and traditional leaders is so germane to this. Thank you.
Thank you for the beautiful work done by the various panelists. My question is on the desirability of the DDR. There have been some comments, observations that the DDR being implemented in the Northeast is not yielding any result. Rather, it's involving the insurgents. And throughout the streams of presentations here, there are possibilities. It has happened that some people around the world have repented. Now, if the DDR is not working properly, what options can government adopt to handle such repentant insurgents or Boko Haram people? 2, I've been asking myself this question, the significance of this research. What is the significance? Are we trying to promote the resilience of people that are caught in this crossfire? What is the significance? Can it be repeated elsewhere? Apart from being the climate, the geopolitics, the geographical space of Nigeria, can it be repeated in other conflict-prone zones? I'm talking about the replicability of these recommendations, this research. Because are we trying to marry it? Are we trying to support the people who are affected in these communities? Are we trying to say it is a normal thing because of who will recommend outright military action to deal with this, which will solve the problem first? Because when these people are being spoon-fed, it gives them that bold, it tries to bold it and to continue. So we believe that Nigeria has the capacity to deal with this, because the DDR and the South-South is not, the environment is not the same with this one. It's not the same with this one. So when we apply the DDR, we should be very careful the research was not so specific whether it's supporting digital or not. So these are my observations. Thank you.
Close to all the presenters, and my questions, just two of them for Professor Donnelly and Chris Quadia. The first one has to do with telling us more about the role of the third tiers of government, the local government. I didn't hear much in terms of what the local government did in terms of supporting the people, the populace. The danger of that is the fact that we have that we work with a number of community-based associations, etc. But then you can really have gatekeepers capturing every available opportunity and things not getting around to everybody that should be part of it. And the second one quickly is what role also did the organized private sector play in terms of supporting the people? The gap banks, a number of organized private sector actors working there, what did they do really to support the people? Because most of them were still somehow able to ensure that their business continued. Thank you.
My name is Sanj. I would like to start from Professor Professor Donnelly. Thank you for your submissions and during your submission. You shared with us some of the challenges experienced in the Northeast and the challenges you experienced in the course of this research. Just as J.P. Clark was mentioned, you are not only a casualty, you are a victim. At the moment you are told about what happened, automatically a casualty. So that being the case, all of us here who have these challenges, we can say we are all casualties. And from what you mentioned, most victims of this crisis are the women. Women, women, women. And this brings to the point that the bitter experiences of these women in times of conflict makes them better and strong adherents of peace-building process. That being the case, it is important that we do not neglect the roles, contributions of these women in peace building. We must also make a seat, not just seats for these women to make their contribution based on their experience in peace building process. Secondly, Professor Dafa mentioned the issue that has to do with forgiveness. Reconciliation can only take place in the atmosphere of healing. We cannot say we want to reintegrate, we want to rehabilitate victims of crimes when healing have not taken place. When you end up returning them back to their base, there is this trauma and fear of insecurity or extermination. And that fear will make them individually to look for means to protect themselves. And in the process, they may end up becoming perpetrators of such crime. I recall when Dr. Paja was talking about the Chinese movie. He watched it. He will end up killing the boy's teacher when he was small. He will leave and go to another town, prepare himself. After years or decades, then he will come back. And when he comes back, he only strikes once, and the post is gone. So as we are trying to rehabilitate, we should also make room for healing of these victims of crime. And that is truth. Truth comes with healing. Healing comes with reconciliation. Thirdly, Dr. Paja mentioned the issue of high rates of accommodation in Meduguri. I have always submitted in some of my write-ups that humanitarian aids have been discovered to have the tendency to fuel and prolong conflict. And these have shown in what is going on in Meduguri. I remember as of 2000, that with 100,000 or 200,000, in the year 2000, 2001, I can rent a 3-bedroom in Meduguri and live comfortably. But as it stands, that is not possible. Why? Because of humanitarian interventions. So as these people are trying to help us with their various humanitarian aids, we shouldn't lose sight of the implications of this on our socio-economic life. The activities, one way or the other, the prolonging or fueling the existing conflict. Remember, in conflict, there are people who cause spoilers. Those who normally we call conflict profiteers. These people benefit when there is conflict. And the moment the tempo of the conflict is going down, their benefit is gradually going down. So they will do everything possible to make the conflict continue so that their benefit will keep coming. So in summary, I want to say we must play room for women who are the victims of this kind. And secondly, we must be careful with the humanitarian aids we keep receiving, so that we might end up eating, we not end up eating, and at the end of the day, find ourselves into a big hole. And secondly, thirdly, finally, we must make room for healing, so that these victims of crime can forgive, heal, and reconcile.
Thank you. Okay. I think it's important for us to state here first that DDRR is not a program or a process that is cast in stone. We may all agree with that. So, depending on the peculiarity of how you want to do it, you might adapt it in such a way that it solves your problem. It's not important for me to say that it's good that some of us should all get the report and read, so that it will help us with our understanding of what we want to say. However, when Dr. Kwada was talking about the recommendation, you could hear him first say that government should work with the communities in the DDR. Now, we cannot stop government from doing a DDR if that's what they want to do. But what we're saying is that it must tally with what the people think. And that answers the question, one of the questions that someone raised about him. Because after when we finish this research, we wait for evaluation of the research and brought back the communities, read out all these reports, and we hear them say we cannot accept them. They told us we are not accepting them. So that's why in our recommendation we are telling government, you can want to do it too, we cannot stop you. But you must tackle with what the communities think, because you are going to take those people back to those communities. If you go through healing, if you go through forgiveness, if you go through all these processes, and the people buy into it, it's easier for the DDR to work. Now, in the course of discussing this DDR, one may ask, I think the Dr. Mali that asked the significance of this request and the issue of the DDR. Remember that if some of us can recall about the Civil War, there's something the Igbos were talking about, the Afia attack, when the Igbos were doing smuggling of goods into the eastern region. Some of these were stories told to us. They were not documented. Today, our research is being documented. Yes, it could be that there is a similarity between what happened in the eastern region and the southeast and the northeast. But what this research has been able to do is to show, yes, there could be similarities of resilience in the eastern region there, and the similarities of what we're having today. However, today we've been able to document them. One, the one of the eastern region, I've not read about any research that people went back. Why this research was, the insurgency was, or the civil war was going on to conduct the research. But we were able to do this while the insurgency was going on. I think that is one significant that this research has brought. Then again, the major thing about this research is that we are trying to show peace-building initiatives and resilience strategies that are local to these people. Either it was local to them before the war, or it arose out of the situation that they needed to solve. And what we're saying in this research is that some of these things, government can use it, develop it more, and use it in other places. And just like Chris recalled, we have similar conflicts in the Northwest. Well, almost in every part of the country. Almost every part of the country has one insecurity or one conflict. And people are going through these situations. And it's good we document them, it's good we share these experiences, that people can look at them and say, okay, it means that if it works in the Northeast, probably if we adapt to those such a situation, it can still work for us. I think that with this I've been able to answer Dr. Mado's question, and I've been able to talk about the DDR. Thank you.
I will say that during the period of the Boko Haram crisis, there was hardly any local government that was operating in the local government. They were all operating from the state capital. I'm talking of Maiduguri, I don't know the other states. From the state capital in Maiduguri, they had their offices there and what have you. In terms of what support were they giving the victims, is it victims or survivors? Both of them. I know that during the conflict, SEMA, which is a state emergency management agency, was supplying food items to the victims, to the IDPs within their camps. They were also supplying clothing. We were supplying other non-food items to the IDPs within the communities. But the majority of the major roles were actually being played by the humanitarian actors, which comprise of the NGOs and the national non-governmental organizations, who were providing life-saving assistance to the people. In terms of food, food was being provided by the WFP, which is World Food Program, FAO, and other non-governmental organizations working in partnership with national non-governmental organizations. The humanitarian crisis in the Northeast was actually considered to be one of the worst crises that there has ever been. And I think in the Oslo conference, there was the fund that was established to help organizations who are supporting the IDPs within the Northeast. I will have to go into another question that was asked about what non-governmental organizations are doing. You know, they seem to be working at cross purposes. It's like checking their boxes and what have you. And I think this is why the government of Borno State last year actually established the Borno State Humanitarian Agency. You know that every organization, whether international or national, has to register with that agency to be able to operate within the state. Another thing that they also established was a 25-year plan, Borno State 25-year plan, in which every organization has to key in. So interventions must key into one aspect of that plan or the other. So the area of coming from abroad or whatever, and then coming and say, this is the area we are going to work, is gone. Which aspect of that plan are you trying to intervene in? So I don't know whether that has answered some of the questions that were asked. But if then I want to talk about, I think my sister likes to talk about issues of disaster plan. NEMA, I think it has now been fused with the Ministry for Humanitarian Affairs. NEMA has a national disaster response plan. But how many of us, even seated here, are aware of the content of that plan? It's one thing to have a plan. It's another thing to implement that plan. And it's another thing to get people to even know about that plan, which is the first step of implementation. And a lot of us do not know that. But then the plan is national. Is there a need to also have state disaster response plans? This is something we need to do, that we take on board the unique context of every state, just like the UNSCR 1325 and the National Action Plan, and which states are called upon to also put in place the state action plan. I'll come to that later.
Thank you, both people.
Unfortunately, I've not seen much of work around the role of the private sector in peace building. That is not to say they are not doing that. But from the angle of corporate social responsibility, it is not just enough to say you are providing hospitals tap-on water, but investment in peace building, reconciliation should be one of the key areas of focus for the private sector. And I think this is something that, as we sit here, we should begin to think through. This report is not meant to solve all the problems, and the report cannot provide all the recommendations, but we are happy that issues of this nature are coming up, and that it's something that we can also integrate here, and other actors that are in the room with mandate to also look at those areas can pick some of these issues and begin to run with. We talk about MTN, for instance, MTN, Airtel, Glo. They spend huge amount of money doing adverts. But how much are they spending on peace? They make profits in peace time and in conflict time. And interestingly, I'm not undertaking a study on that, but my gut feeling tells me that they make more money in conflict situations than even in peace time. Because in conflict situations, people begin to run to buy network, buy credit, buy credit, buy credit. The amount of calls you make because you are under pressure is much. But what is the corresponding impact on the part of the private sector when it comes to providing some of those assistance? Dangote, for instance, was the first to provide trailers of cement in the Northeast. The Tiwa Foundation was the first to provide 1.5 billion during the launch of the victim support project, and that is why he was made the chairman of the presidential committee. Himself and several other individuals made those donations. So we can see that some of them have done, but it is still not enough, because we've got them at the federal, at the state. Sometimes many of these businesses in the state level operate as if people don't know what they are doing, but they are making money, but they are not supporting peace efforts at the state level. So I think this is also something that we should also pick from here. Let's not just focus on the big guys and the big women. Let's target those that are operating at the state level, because they are also making money, and we can get them under the spirit of corporate social responsibility to begin to ensure that they invest in peace building. When you move around Abuja and many states, you see vehicles donated by Dangote Foundation, this police using them. We want to see more of that. But my point about peace is that we must defund security and fund peace. Because when you securitize peace in ways that makes government spend 10 billion naira on security, while in fact, if they have spent 2 billion on peace building, we wouldn't have had any reason to spend 10 billion in security. So I think for me that is the focus. So if you have a National Security Council, how much are you investing in the agencies for peace building? Because the agencies for peace building, the structures for peace building, represent the softer approach to dealing with peace that is very cheap. It's people focused. But when you talk about security, you see the police, civil defense, the army, the air force, everybody coming in with budgets about how to buy aircraft, how to buy weapons, and many of the weapons they buy are not even used. So when you buy our personnel carrier, how many are you using? But these are monies that we have gone into dealing with some of the governance and development issues that are dealing with these people. But again, this is also a conversation that we need to carry on this.
Okay, thank you very much. I just have an addition to the answers given to two questions. One relates to the role played by LGAs in the process of managing the conflict situation that related to stabilizing and catering for the displaced persons. Although the local government's administration relocated from their various physical local governments and came to Maiduguri, the local government officials, although most of them are appointed caretaker committee members, had contributed fairly well in terms of organizing for where there are displaced people to be settled inside Maiduguri. So they negotiated specific ID cards for specific local governments so as to maintain homogeneity among their displaced communities. But in some cases, like the Bakasti IDP camp, there were up to 3-4 local governments there. But even within the combined local government IDPs, the organizational structure still provided for coordinating committees on behalf of the specific local government committees. And this was very important in especially attracting and distributing relief materials. Unfortunately, the process was politicized, so they also played a negative role. Some of the officials cornered some of the relief materials and diverted such for personal use. But at least they maintained that the continuity of consultation among their communities in diaspora, as a displaced community. The second point relates to the DDRR. The question had two segments. He said that it doesn't seem it is working, so what is the significance of it? And he also asked a rider, what is the alternative to it? So I will talk about the alternative to it. I think the DDR, especially the Operation Safe Corridor, as it is organized in Gombe State, seems to be outlandish. Outlandish in the sense that it is working on the principles of Western society. And the training given to them was seen as end in itself. So after some weeks training, giving them trade and skills, you just unleash them onto the community where the people are afraid of them. So some people have suggested that why don't we adopt the Siberian principle in the old USSR? If you are too troublesome in the mainland Russia, they will take you temporarily to Siberia, where the situation will be so tough for you that you behave until you are sober enough to come back. So some people say, well, just like it was done in the Niger Delta, why don't you, after training these people, relocate them to somewhere very far from their indigenous communities and give them something that is sustainable so that they adopt a new community where people do not know them and they don't pose threat. Before eventually, if things settle completely, they can either start migrate or they can be recalled because the traumatized indigenous communities have forgotten the trauma. But when you send them after the training, and there is no guarantee that they will behave, and indeed some of them have gone back to the forest. So it is the style of the DD that is, I think, faulty. And if we can devise a mechanism of getting these people off our community, even if you send them somewhere outside the country and bear the cost, they may at least be forgotten about before they come back. Thank you.
A quick addition to organized private sector. In addition to what Dangote also did with the cement, I know Dangote brought trailer loads of food items for the IDPs in Borno State. I don't know how much you know about WANEP. WANEP is putting up a program on peace and businesses. It's about reaching out to the business community and having a discussion with them on the importance of peace and how they can contribute to peace within the sub-region. I think that it would be nice to have a conversation with them on where they are and see how we can partner with them. And then, my dear sister, I'm coming back to you. The national peace policy, the draft national peace policy that has gone comatose next year, can you bring it alive? At least bring it to discussion. Let's have a conversation. Bring a conversation around the draft national policy and make it active and see how Nigeria can adopt a national peace policy. I know that there is a national security peace council which is chaired by the former president. You understand? But how many people know about that? They only become active around the elections. How do we make them relevant even during peace time? One of the grounds that people have about the returning Boko Haram people, they say that it pays to be violent. They say it pays to be violent. When you are peaceful, you don't get anything. These people are taken away, they are giving money, and then people that are victims are left alone to suffer. I think one of the areas of the DDR and why it has not worked, that is one aspect. The second aspect is the fact that DDR should have another act, which is reconciliation and and forgiveness. A lot of the people, the victims, do not even know what is happening in the Operation Safe Corridor in Gombe. There is no creation of awareness. Yes, we know there is secrecy and what have you. There should be public awareness on what happens in that place. You tell me they are repentant. You have not told me what you are doing with the people there. So when they come back, we have a lot of suspicions when they come back. And because they are not accepted, last month or 2 months ago, I think December, there were lorry loads and bus loads of repentant Boko Haram that came from Gombe. Like my brother Paul said, a lot of them have gone back to the Sambisa forest. So something is definitely not working. Yes. And we must look at that thing that is not working. Yes. How can we have a conversation with the people who are concerned with running Operation Safe Corridor?
On this on the organized private sector, it's important for us to understand that what Chris said, there's need for us to invest more in the area of peace building. I remember early 2000, the wife of the guy that owns McDonald's donated a some amount of money, I can't remember the exact money, to a Department of Peace in the Catholic University in the US, that's the University of Notre Dame. Below the amount she donated, she said, now they will know that I'm serious about peace. She donated an amount of money that made the department to make the master's program for peace building. They took it from 1 year to 2 years. The 2 years meant you will do 1 year with them, fully paid. The next 1 year, they will put you in any of the institutions that you want to be in the world and they won't pay you. If you tell them I want to go to the World Bank to do my internship, they put you in the World Bank and pay your 1 year, they'll pay you from the moment they got. It's important for us to know that there are a lot of Professor Dharma has a center in the Medjugorje. There are a lot of centers. How come nobody is in putting money in those centers, say, study this? If the British Council and the European Union didn't fund this program, no organized private sector in Nigeria will fund it. But we are ready to buy for these cars, but we are not ready to stop those things that are escalating those conflicts. You know, like one guy said, most times talking about Nigeria as a crime. Yeah. But let's get from more of this.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nwoko.
This is a very deep research that opens up a lot on how we can support the Northeast. However, let me just make this statement. In the course of this insurgency over the years, we've had so many statements that have been made by government and even military officers. One of the very popular ones was that Boko Haram has been technically defeated. We've had statements like they have been contained and all other statements. However, recently, the man who is supposed to be leading in this fight, General Burutai, told us that the insurgency will not end early. He says it's going to take a long time. I don't know the context in which that statement came, but for some of us that have been following what is happening here, it dampened our enthusiasm and made us feel that we are not saddled with a problem that is going to take a long time to finish. I don't know the context. I don't know whether it is because of the level of commercialization of the incident, of the insurgency, or the involvement of soldiers in terms of the economic benefits of the insurgents, or the lack of facilities, the lack of coordination, or even amongst the armed forces, the three main armed forces. I don't know that, but I would like the panelists to react to that statement. Given that you guys have been in the field, you've seen a lot, some of you live in Maiduguri, you hear a lot, you see a lot, so maybe your insight will give us hope. Thank you.
Everyone, I want to appreciate Next Year SPD for this wonderful gathering. It's an opportunity where people can bring their ideas, and through this, I believe more solutions will come up to solve the issue in the northeastern region. My question is based on the challenges posed by this urgency, which was given by Professor Patricia. We made mention of government officials and security personnel abusing the vulnerables, exploiting them in one way or the other. I would really want to, I'm concerned. I want to know, I'm curious, is there any follow-up on issues like that? Or because it's a research, it's just left like that? Is there any follow-up?
Thank you. A lot has been said about how to deal with the conflict in the Northeast. Like in the papers presented today, it's all about how to deal with issues in the Northeast. But everything seems to center more on government involvement, To me, this conflict has gone on for the past 10 years. And it's all government involvement in it, and there's no sign that this conflict is ending. When I saw this topic, Entrenching Peace, Assessing Community Residence and Peace Building Initiatives in the Northeast Nigeria, what struck me most was community residence. What is community residence? What is that thing that is making the community want to stay back in their community? I then realized that it has a structural foundation with the means of livelihood of the people. What do people survive on? Yes, it was said earlier that some of them decided to start changing historical businesses, yes? But when they don't even have the means to get it done. These are mostly farmers. The means of survival centers of farmers. And the job of the state is to do what? To provide them security. But the state is not providing it. Well, my own conclusion on the whole thing is that government cannot deal with conflict in the Northeast. Communities can. If you entrench it on the communities can deal with the conflict because they are the ones working with it. Just like we have bandits, we have kidnappers, we have attacks. Communities know how these things can be dealt with. But government is not interested in listening to the communities, they're interested in bringing their own narrative to the community, which is not even workable. So my question is this. A lot of recommendations were made about all of the centers to center on government involvement. Why didn't they give some consideration to the economic aspect? That is, the main means of livelihood of the people. How do you move towards resettling them back into those areas? Thank you.
Okay, my question is about the trauma path Madam Professor Dolly mentioned earlier. She mentioned the impact, one of the impacts of the war as trauma. And of course, we know how this affects the mental well-being of people. We all know in Nigeria, mental health issues is nothing that is really not talked about. And if it isn't being discussed, there's something we don't really pay attention to because we forget that our mental health is also as important as our physical health and we don't pay attention. And we know when there's crisis, women and girls are being hit there. She mentioned gender-based violence. She mentioned how some of them are being abused, and all these things at the end of the day have an effect on their mental, on their physical and emotional well-being. So as much as we're trying to get these women back on their feet, and as much as we're trying to get people back into the environment, what are we doing about their psychological support? Because of course we always have to intervene with a psychosocial support approach. So as much as they're providing the social means for them to get back on feet, for them to get back to the environment, we also need to consider the fact that we need to also consider how their mind, what their state of mind at that time. Are you actually catering for that? And I like that you mentioned that some of them are actually leveraging on their community interaction to also see how they can get themselves back. But this is very imperative because we do not want to just get people back to be active, but also we need them to be active rather than not just passive members of the society.
My name is Dr. Jonathan Meawa. I want to make some observations as well as comment and question at the same time. I want to start by the topic itself, assessing community resilience and peace building initiative in Northeast Nigeria. From the discussion from the panelists, I was made to understand that this study focused on Adamawa and Borno State, which is the epicenter of the conflict. And broadening it to Northeast as a whole, I think there's a missing gap there. I am of the opinion that the study should specifically focus on Adamawa and Borno State rather than the Northeast. Then the other aspect that I want to observe there is the peace building initiative. I was ruminating, how does coping strategy lead to peace building? How does it lead to peace building? And I want to throw that question also to Professor Bilaba. How does coping strategy, traditional coping strategy of the people lead to peace? And the other aspect that I also want to observe here is that I don't know the context in which this research has been framed, but I want to say here that whether this research is just broad and without specific focus by providing statistics on how many people have been able to cope as a result of this insurgency, and how many people have been displaced and returned back and then evolved their strategies to be able to cope again You know, if you look at the statistics of IMO and then IDMC, you will discover that they have specific numbers of people that have been displaced and then return back to the community and then evolve their traditional lifestyle and continue in that form. Finally, I want to also ask this question that as a follow-up to what Dr. Modu said initially, the significance of this study vis-a-vis continent studies. Have there been other studies related to community resilience in other continents as well as in Africa, and how does it relate to what you are doing, next year is doing in the Northeast? And how can this study, I mean, in terms of the methodology, can it be replicated elsewhere and then get the same results? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are reaching the presentation. I'm from Center for Peace, Advocacy and Sustainable Development. I want to make a recommendation. I want to recommend next SPD for this, for digging deep into this research work. And I think this research work can serve as a blueprint in continuous seeking for more remedy ways to reduce this insurgency trend in some part of the Northern East, while finding other approaches to win the war against insurgency. And also, I want to also say that the fight for peaceful coexistence is a fight for all. But the major government agency should work with synergy, understand, in order to get this solved.
Thank you. 40 seconds, sir.
Well, let me see if I can manage that. First of all, next year, please, if you want to delve into the issue of the national peace policy, go to the Office of the National Security Advisor, go to IPCR, Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, because the politics behind that, you will be able to unravel it when you get there. I was involved in that, and I know where we got to and we got stuck. So if you are taking it up, it's a good thing, please try to go that way. Secondly, please, on coping mechanism, I see that a lot of things were said, but please, let's not be shy of also making reference to some of the negative issues that have arisen as a result of the situation. A lot of coping mechanisms have tendencies towards negativity. I think, Dr. Chris, you are based in Adamawa, I'm aware of that. In Adamawa State today, the issue is not so much as the issue of Boko Haram, but the issue of kidnapping, the issue of Sheila boys, and the issue of drug. So these are issues that we must also find space for them to be mentioned. Finally, on the recommendations, let's not forget that the extent to which the foreign aids we get will carry us is the extent to which those who are bringing the money want us to go. I worked with the Germans for 7 years. I worked with the Americans for close to 10 years. I've worked with the British for about 5-6 years now. And one thing that I've seen nowadays is that it is when you are getting the traction to get results, they tell you they are stopping the funding, and there's nothing you can do. So in our recommendations, let's try to look at those recommendations that are not capital intensive and also focus more on what the local communities can do. I think that is going to help us a lot. Thank you.
So one is a recommendation, and another is a question. The question would be, because you've done this research, I'm curious to know the dimension or the strategy of transitional justice in these communities, right? Because that would be a very interesting thing to know. Also, because we're talking about community resilience right now. So, how are these communities ensuring that some form of social justice after these things are happening is ensured? That's one. Second is, I think around peace building initiatives in Nigeria will have a very big issue, and that's data. If you go to Salad University, they have this big center for data, and all they do there is data. You can go and find anything you're looking for. But it's difficult to do that in Nigeria. Schools are not, I don't think schools have capacity to do that.
Looking at what Nested is doing, I think Nested is the next big organization that you can think about that would have the intention and capacity to do things like that. So maybe you can think about having a big data center, a big data project, where we can now all come to you to get information about things you're looking for, because of the kind of work we've done using this pen.
It's difficult for us to explain everything that is done. I'm sure if you read this report, most of these questions won't come up, because all the answers are there. You know, like they say, it takes two to tango. When somebody says, oh, you are talking about government, first we try to show what the communities were doing. We showed what the government were doing. We showed what the NGOs are doing. So, even while you're reading the report, you will see the way we did the analysis. Some of the answers, all the answers are in the report. However, there are some new ones that we might put in the report again before it's finally closed. So we want to do it at 1 o'clock, like our tradition. We don't want to see 1 o'clock. So I think the next agenda is closing remarks, which I'm quite doing now. We'll continue to engage, you know, and then some of these questions you ask, we're going to provide the answer, and then it might come in our policy brief. So we're going to send the answers and all that, because we want us to give them 1 o'clock. With that, I'll hand over to Ms. Indiana to close the program.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Indiana, like you rightly said. Well, on behalf of the entire SPRC, I thank you so much for joining us today. My colleagues who made this possible will be on this instance last week. We went to Yola, and then we had the dissemination for the nitty-gritty, and then we are here again. So all the team, both those who work with us physically and those off stage, I really appreciate all your efforts. Our consultants, Dr. Paja, Professor Dalapa, Professor Patricia, we thank you all for